In this video, I want to explain all about the basics of owning and using a wood splitter safely. My name's Steve Maxwell. I've been heating my home with wood for about 30 years or so. The wood piles you see here, these are the ones that we're going to be burning this year. I've been using wood splitters for more than 20 years of that 30 that I've been burning wood, and I think that they're really an indispensable tool if you want to take wood heating seriously. Why would you want to do that? Well, because it can save you a lot of money, first of all. It's also a fun activity. You can get some exercise. Wood heat is a wonderful thing to have in your home. But the bottom line is that it can save you a lot of money. And even if you live in an urban area or a suburban area, it's surprising the access to wood that you have. You know, people cutting down trees in the neighborhood, trimming branches. Wood is surprisingly available. And it can be put to good use, and a wood splitter is important and useful for making that happen. So, wood splitters, what do? Well, they take logs like this that have been cut to length. The length is going to fit your wood stove or fireplace, and they drive a wedge. The wedge is what you see here. They drive a wedge to split that wood along its length. Now, there's two reasons to do that. First of all, it makes the wood smaller, in quite a fast way too. It's a lot quicker to split wood along its length than it would be to saw it along its length, for instance. So it makes the wood easier to handle, but more importantly, it allows the wood to dry much more thoroughly. Because a piece of wood like this, completely surrounded by bark, the bark really holds the moisture in, but when you open up the wood and you split it open, you're exposing fresh, unbark covered wood, and the drying will happen much more quickly. This splitter here is a hydraulic wood splitter. There are different kinds. Hydraulic is the most common. And we have an engine here that operates a hydraulic pump, which is this part of the unit here. The hydraulic pump draws hydraulic oil from the reservoir, which is this bottom part of the splitter here, and it forces it into this cylinder. And the cylinder, when you flip the lever, moves down with a lot of force. In this case, it's 25 tons of force, and it splits the wood. It's a lot easier than splitting with an axe, and certainly if you're doing any sizable quantities of wood, this is far better than any sort of an axe. You'll be able to actually put up reasonable amounts of wood with this year after year after year without dreading the operation. Before I get going and show you exactly how this splitter works, I need to go over some safety rules. A splitter is a useful tool. It can be extremely safe if you follow a couple of safety rules. And one is to never have your hands on the wood while it's being split. Now, that's very easy to do with one hand because you're going to have to be controlling the lever. And since it's spring-loaded and returns back to the neutral position when you let go, and the cylinder and the wedge stops, you can be sure this hand is always safely out of harm's way. The other hand, though, you have to pay attention to, because the tendency is to want to put your hand on the log to steady it as you're splitting. That may work out okay, but it's always safer to keep well away from the wood. So my rule of thumb is I operate the lever this way. I keep my hand by my side or behind my back when the splitting is actually happening. So I'm completely safe that way. Now, related to that is something that happens when you have a helper. That's even more dangerous, because if you have one person operating the splitter and another person retrieving logs and putting them on here, it's very easy, once you get in the rhythm of work and you really start getting going as fast as you can for productivity, for that helper's hands to be around the wedge. And because their hands are not connected to your hand operating the lever, that can be a hazard. So when you have a helper, make it a point to make sure they're completely free of the log before you do this. Don't operate the lever while they're holding the log in any way. If you follow that procedure, then you will split for many years with complete safety. Now, one other thing, hearing protection. You're going to be using a splitter like this for hours and hours. Look how close I am to the motor and the muffler. It's pretty loud. It's not any louder than, you know, a bunch of other gas-powered equipment, but because you're exposed to it for long periods of time, hearing protection, I consider that a must. Eye protection, another good idea. I mean, it's not as hazardous here as if for your eyes, as if you're grinding some metal or something like that. But you do never know when a splinter might fly up from the log or something like that. It's not very likely, but your eyes are precious. So consider protecting them. Definitely wear hearing protection and keep all hands off the wood while the split is actually happening. One other safety rule that I want to leave you with right now has to do with fueling up. Now, if you're using the splitter all day, the only way you're going to know you need to add fuel is when you run out. And that might happen once or twice or maybe even 3 times in one day. It's very important that you let the engine cool for at least 5 minutes before you fuel up again. Reason being is if you have a spill on a hot engine, that could ignite and that'd make for a very bad day. So just let it cool down for 5 minutes, top it up, and then continue on working. So as you can see, a splitter like this is mobile. And in this particular case, there's large air-filled wheels. So this splitter is actually designed to be towed on an official road. I'm going to do that now. I'm going to hitch up to the truck and I'm going to take you to a place where I can show you a feature of this splitter that you haven't seen yet that makes it much easier to deal with big, heavy wood. So far, I've shown you splitting in the horizontal position, but when you're dealing with great big wood, like that stuff over there, nobody wants to lift that up onto the splitter. And that's where the vertical splitting position comes in. Not all splitters can do this, but I know from experience that it's extremely valuable. So in this case, there's a locking pin here that you pull out, and then the whole cylinder and beam goes vertical. So now all we have to do is wheel the wood over, not pick it up, and then just start splitting it in place, more or less on the ground. So as you can see, this splitter has plenty of power, and the power of a splitter is usually denoted by the tonnage rating. So this is a 25-ton splitter, which means it's squeezing with 25 tons of force, and it can go through pretty well anything. I have yet to see any knots or wavy grain that can't be handled by 25 tons of squeezing force. Now, as far as maintaining the splitter during use, when you're using it fairly regularly, like at least once a month, there's really not much to it. You have to check the engine oil, of course, pretty straightforward. Top it up with gas. And then the body of the splitter back here is actually hollow, and it contains the hydraulic oil. So this is oil that is driven by the pump through the cylinder via the valve that you've seen in action. And all you have to remember there is just to keep your eye on the level. If there are no leaks, that level's not going to go down, but it's always good to keep your eye on that. And there's a sight window here on the side of the tank that lets you check hydraulic oil very easily. Eventually, you'll be done with the splitter for the season, and if you're going to be storing it for more than about 30 days, there's some things you should do. One thing I like to do is to clean off all the chips and sawdust and bark and things like that. It'll hold moisture against the splitter. It could promote corrosion. Might as well just clean it up. You want to change the engine oil, of course. Also, you want to top up the gas tank with some gas line preservative mixed in. Gas doesn't really age very well. It won't burn properly after several months, or certainly a year, but the preservative will keep it in good condition. Now also, you'll want to run the engine so that all the gas is burned up from the carburetor. So shut off the fuel valve, fire up the engine, and let it run until it runs out of gas. Then you know there's no more gas in the carburetor that can cause it to gum up. Make sure to fully retract the cylinder so the ram shaft doesn't get corroded during storage. Next, you should top up the pressure in the tires so that the thing is ready to roll for you next time you use it. It's essential to store this under cover if you want it to last a long time. And that's not just to protect it from rain, but also from sun. You know, the sun is quite damaging, and eventually it can age the splitter more than it should. Finish up by checking the air filter, cleaning it, putting it back together. And as a final step, take the spark plug out, inspect it, see how it looks, but also put about a tablespoon of motor oil in the spark plug hole. Pull the recoil starter a few times to distribute that oil around the cylinder, and then replace the spark plug again. You're all set to split next year.